Hello everyone and welcome to the Enki Jazz Podcast. Today it is my very great pleasure to be chatting to the incredible Shirley Smart, who is that rarest of things, a jazz cellist. She has worked in a fantastically diverse array of music in her life and we had a very, very interesting time chatting. So I hope you enjoy the podcast as much as I did chatting to her. Please head over to patreon.com/Enki Jazz and help support everything that we've been doing here over the last few months, including our remote concerts, including our improvised soundtracks to silent film, and of course the rest of our podcast series. And in the meantime, sit back and enjoy the podcast. Shirley, welcome to the Enki Jazz Podcast. Thank you so much for taking the time out to join us.
Thank you.
We're heartbroken to have not had you coming and playing during the summer, but hopefully we'll be able to make that happen anon.
We'll get that sorted eventually. I'm sure things will come back at some point. We just have to wait it all out a bit. I guess like everybody else, I've been... what's the word I'm looking for? Wombling on. Yeah. I mean, I guess I've been trying to just make as constructive a use of the time that I've had and the situation that I can. It's one of the things that there's not a lot you can do about it. And I'm a great believer, you can't do anything about it, then try and do something else. And it's really hard in a lot of ways. And I think you just have to weather it and be strong and keep going through it, which is what I've tried to do. I've had quite a lot of research work to do, but right at the beginning of the lockdown, I'm doing a doctorate, so I had quite a lot of research to catch up on that because I was slightly behind.
I
basically
that anyone has ever done ever.
And it's absolutely part of the course with doctors. You never know quite where you are with them, but I definitely had to do some catching up. So I basically went into a bit of a tunnel for about 3 months and did that and practiced a lot and then stuck my head above ground and went, oh my God, for a little while, and drank wine for a couple of weeks and I had a little bit of a crash. And then, just pick yourself up and carry on, figure out, okay, what's next? What have I got to do? Same thing. How do I keep going and keep making use of the time?
Do you mind me asking what the topic of your doctorate is? Well, what are you... if it's too traumatic, we can back away.
The other explode on site question. Well, my starting point is the idea of authenticity in cross-cultural performance, because obviously this is something that's going to come up during the course of the interview, I'm sure, but my background involves me having lived in the Middle East for 10 years, slightly by accident. While I was there, I got very involved in a lot of different traditions that were there. I mean, again, completely by accident, but it totally transformed my entire musical sort of sense of who I was and how I played and loads of things. And obviously I was living with that and with jazz also, and they're all very mixed up there. Mm-hmm. And when I came back here, there's a very, very different culture with that and a very different relationship of the two things. And the question of authenticity just kept coming up in a lot of different ways, and it kept hitting me in the face every time I turned a corner. And eventually I just found it really interesting. And it had been in my mind to do a PhD for quite a long time, and that sort of turned into the one that I've ended up doing. Yeah. Slowly and painfully.
Yeah, I mean, it feels like it's becoming probably not from the direction that you've been starting from, at least with that, but it feels like it's become a very prevalent issue, even with regards to just jazz being Black American music and the whole role that jazz has to play in race issues as well.
Absolutely, and it's very, very different. It's a very, very different discourse, for example, in jazz and in jazz scholarship than it is in, for want of a better term, I really don't like this term and we need a better one, but world music. It's a very, very different discourse, and I actually find that very interesting in itself. So that's going to be a part of my PhD, is looking at those two things and how they've developed and why they're different discourses. There's loads of stuff that is going to happen on the course of this thing that's going to get chucked out, but it's a really, really interesting, and there's about 50 million different PhDs you could write on it.
For sure.
Something will come out at the end.
Definitely, and that's fascinating. I mean, I'll keep my eyes peeled. That sounds like
I wouldn't start peeling them for another 5 years yet, but it'll turn up eventually.
Well, look, so let's delve back a little bit to begin with. So you've had a very distinguished career as a classical musician, to begin with,
That's delving back more than a little bit, but yeah.
But from what I've seen there, your concerto debut in St. Petersburg, chamber concerts with Yo-Yo Ma, you had a good run of things, So.
Yeah, I did have a reasonable run as a classical cellist, obviously, as a string player. I think now things are actually starting to change and open out in earlier education for string players, which is great. And this is one of my favourite rants ever. But yeah, they definitely are starting to change. But obviously, as a string player, your default is classical, and obviously that's is a huge and great musical tradition to play in, and but it's certainly nice to know other ones. And yeah, I grew up as a classical cellist, and I certainly had a good run at it professionally as well. So I'm not sorry about that. It's a beautiful thing to have done.
Well, you're talking to someone who also started out as a classical musician and now is a jazz musician, so I totally sympathise.
Yeah, it's great music. I love it. I still play Bach on my shitty old keyboard over there, but I still practice it, and I still look at it as a composer, and I still love it as music. I don't really enjoy playing it on stage that much, although this may happen next year. I may do a gig next year. We'll see.
Fantastic.
Yeah, I did start out there about 4 million years ago.
So, at what stage in your career or in your life did jazz first start to take hold, and at what point did that turn into then, actually, this is what I need to do for my career, this is my musical outlet?
Oh, that's an interesting question. I don't know if there was a particular moment. I know when I was at the Guildhall, I started kind of hearing all these noises coming from the basement, and I would kind of go down and go, that sounds interesting. What's going on down here? At that time, I couldn't find a way in to become part of that world. And it just didn't, the doors weren't opening for me. So I carried on as a classical cellist. And then various things were going on in life, and I just kind of felt like I really need a change of scene. And this is kind of how I ended up. This was a chain of accidents that I ended up with me being in Jerusalem.
But before that, you went and studied in Paris for a while as well.
Only for a little while. It was a masterclass course that I did with Janos Starker, which was, even though it was short, it's one of the things that I remember the most, and really I got a lot out of that. He was an incredible teacher. I mean, he was an incredible cellist as well, but he was a really, really phenomenal teacher because he could see right through you. And he knew he could just work you out and say like 2 or 3 things that he knew would sit with you for years. And, I got so much out of that. It was like 2.5 weeks or 3 weeks or something, but it was amazing. But a little weird time sort of happened after Guildhall, and I felt like I was just totally stuck. And I thought, I was kind of exploding inside, and I didn't quite know what was going on. And I actually went to the Banff Centre for the Arts. I think this might be the first time I've told this story on a video podcast, but and while I was there was this Israeli piano trio. And they were hilariously funny because their rehearsals used to consist of them going into a room and screaming at each other in Hebrew for 3 hours and then coming out again, and no one knew what they were talking about. But they were incredible musicians. I mean, they were already touring the world and stuff. They were a world-class trio. Anyway, we were all talking one night, as you do in the bar and these things, and getting quite drunk over a snooker table, and I was saying pretty much what I just said to you, and one of them just kind of went, why don't you come to Israel? Maybe you'll like it. And literally about 3 or 4 days later, I was wandering about somewhere in Canada, and it came back to me, and I thought, actually, maybe this would be quite interesting to look into. So I went to the library and I found it on a map. I was like, where is it? It's over there somewhere. And I knew very little. I knew nothing about the conflict. I knew sometimes it was on the telly, but I was politically totally unaware of really what's going on there. And yeah, it looked interesting. So I bunged in an application for a scholarship and thought no more of it, and it just worked out. So I went. It was a total accident. But I think I was really lucky because very early on I met some really interesting people, and just a lot of different avenues of things that were totally fascinating to me opened up. I started teaching in Palestine as well, and I joined this Moroccan band. I was playing a Schubert string trios in a bar one night, and this very dodgy looking guy came up to me and said, do you want to play some Moroccan jazz? And I kind of looked at him and thought, what is that? And who? You look really dodgy. So naturally, I kind of went off with him after the gig, and I met this really amazing bunch of people that and that was really the opening into the kind of, my North African influences, because that was the core of that band. But there was in that band some amazing musicians. There was a bass player called Omar Avital, who's like quite a well-known jazz bass player now. Pianist called Henri Moore, who was also a phenomenal improviser, great jazz musician. And it was just a load of jazz musicians in the band. So it was really kind of a core of North African jazz fusion to start with. And that's basically how it happened. But it's a total accident. I never meant to do it.
All the best laid plans are accidents. So I lived in South Africa for a year.
I thought that was interesting.
Sort of by accident as well. While I was in my 4th year of undergrad, I sent off my CV to a couple of jobs that came up just to get some feedback on my CV to apply for some sort of high-end teaching post. And this international post had come up in South Africa, but they were looking for someone who already had a master's degree. So I thought, well, I won't get the job, but it'll be interesting to see what they say. Then I did a little Skype interview that ended up being in a percussion studio because I was doing a rehearsal with an orchestra next door and I had to run in. I was dressed in a suit on the top half and shorts on the bottom. Ran in, did my little Skype interview, and then they offered me the job, which obviously I hadn't expected. One of my closest friends is probably someone you know, Abel Selauchwe, the South African cellist.
I know of him. I've not actually met him, but I know of him.
He's one of my closest friends, and
right.
He said to me, man, you must go. And I was saying, oh, well,
isn't he South African?
Yeah, he's from.
Yeah, he is. Yeah,
from Soweto.
Yeah, wow.
Yeah, I was saying, do I really want to go to South Africa? I'm going to feel, really uncomfortable teaching at this school that, is probably mostly white students, and I'm not sure this is really what I want to do. So he talked me into it, and then there was some visa issues, and basically in a similar thing, I ended up basically getting an email from the school one morning that said, look, there's all these visa issues, but the term's already started, the students have no teacher, get on the next plane to South Africa and we'll sort it out when you get here. So I did. I got online, there was a flight leaving in 3 hours, so I booked it, I sort of threw some stuff in a suitcase and then went to South Africa for a year.
Excellent. Yes. Man after my own heart. Brilliant. Great. Yeah. And did you have a good? I mean, did you have having a good time is not the right question to ask.
Yeah. It was amazing. I did have a good time.
Yeah.
I made a great group of friends over there. It was difficult in a lot of ways. The first time you drive past a shanty town,
yeah.
And the reality of that hits you in the face.
Yeah.
That's very difficult.
Yeah.
I found a lot of things very confusing, as in how you're supposed to do the right thing. So the accommodation I was first given was some apartments that the school owned at their old boys club. So I had this free apartment, which is lovely, but it was hilarious. It was this 3-bed apartment and unfurnished, and just me there in a corner. So I managed to borrow a bed, a chair, and a bedside table from some staff at the school, and that was the entire furniture in this entire 3-bed apartment. So it was very surreal.
Wow.
Waddling around in the place.
Yeah.
And then on the second day there or something, someone knocked on the door and said, I'm the cleaner. I'll be here. I'll come every Thursday and clean for you, and this is how much it costs. And I said, I don't need, me as a 22-year-old person, I don't need a cleaner. I've got 3 bits of furniture, and then what is there to clean? And for me, I grew up from working class background. We had no money at home. My mother worked as a cleaner for a bit. Seeing that from that side, I was like, I don't want to pay for a cleaner. This is really.
It's weird. I sympathise.
Cleaning for me, this
yeah. Weird.
So I said no. And then I was talking to one of the teachers at the school about it, and said what had happened and how bizarre I found it, and the idea of a black man being my cleaner just felt so uncomfortable. And they said Look, I sort of understand what you're saying, but you can afford to hire this man as a cleaner. Therefore, you're hiring him as a cleaner, because if you don't hire him as a cleaner, he can't afford to
Got no
feed
work.
his family. You know.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
oh, okay, yeah. And then
It's
immediately
it's
went
never
back.
quite as simple as it seems, are it? Those kind of
Exactly, yeah.
situations, and I know that, like, loads of people have very well-meaning ideas about things, and then when you put the actual, like, that kind of practical reality, it complicates things, and it puts you in not quite such a cut and dried position.
Yeah, absolutely.
Definitely, it's lovely to talk about, you know, the nice times that you had when you lived abroad, but especially places like certainly the Middle East and South Africa, they're not easy. And there you see some very, very difficult things that turn you inside out, and they are not always easy to process at all as a human being, or to talk about. And I don't think we should avoid those either. Like, you know, I taught in Palestine for 8 years, and Israel Palestine I do find very difficult to talk about because it is politically so explosive. And my life was very, very much split. You know, I traveled between both. I worked on both sides. I didn't go with a political opinion, and my political opinions now about it are still very conflicted and very it's such a complicated situation that we don't know what to do sometimes or say. And I had a cello. I don't know if this is too heavy for a podcast, but I had a cello student who was used as a human shield. And that wasn't tremendously easy to, you know, for anybody, and, you know, stuff like that. So yeah, it's complicated. I don't think you should avoid it at all, and it has to be acknowledged that those things are there, and that's part of your, you know, not just my experience, it's part of those people's life as well. And that's something we have to know about.
And from there, then you just decided this is something that you want to. Did you study at any point? Did you engage with sort of traditional, you know, standards, the sort of Great American Songbook, or has that never been of interest, or is it something that you loved at some point? You do now, you know?
That's a really, really good question. I mean, I don't even know actually if there's any point. Certainly, with, I suppose, in Jerusalem, the Middle Eastern and jazz stuff together was so interchangeable and sort of intertwined that for me, it was very difficult to separate them, and still I find that actually. And I will come back to your question about the standards in a second, because I really do love playing that stuff as well. And sometimes I just want to take the Middle Eastern stuff out and spend a bit more time doing that as well, because, you know, I love that, and that is jazz. But for me, that experience is so strong that this is jazz as well.
Yeah, of course.
Do you know what I mean? And I don't know if there was a particular moment when I decided to do that, or even that I studied it, because it was just something that happened very organically and very gradually. And I was just kind of, oh, this is fun. You know, I'm having fun with this. It's nice. And we used to go to this little soup kitchen in Jerusalem and sort of jam. Sometimes Abishai Cohen would turn up if he was in Israel and kind of play the bass, so that was interesting. You know, there was a really amazing vibe there actually. You know, it's not the sort of place that you would think of, that there is an amazing jazz scene. So, you know, people don't think of that when you say Jerusalem, but there's some amazing musicians there. And it really is a very small, intense and very interesting scene. So I guess I just sort of fell into that. And there was also an oud player, Palestinian or Israeli and Arab, many ways of terming this, but there was an oud player in the band as well. So with him, he started teaching me a lot of classical Arabic music as well. So that was another kind of trajectory that happened, again, very organically, and I started playing with him much more traditional Arabic music. I didn't do so much really straight ahead jazz playing there. I did more when I came back here. But to be honest, in the UK, I found it very, very strange and very, very difficult to find a little way into that as a cellist. And that's been much more of an issue than anything else in the jazz world. It's been a very, very interesting journey, that one. Yeah. But I love standards. I love playing standards. And you want to play more standards.
I think, you know, like you say, I don't think I would necessarily associate Jerusalem with, you know, a burning jazz scene. But definitely the one thing that I would associate it with, which ties in exactly with what you're saying, is it's a massive cultural melting pot, you know.
Absolutely, yeah.
Such a historically important city for so many different people and different cultures and all the rest, that, you know, that shines through in your experience for sure, it sounds like, you know.
Very much so. And what I find really interesting, say, especially now having lived back here for quite a long time and having seen the UK from a very different perspective, because obviously 10 years there, you become very much enculturated to Israeli life. And, there is definitely a point where I see the world through, for want of a better term, almost through an Israeli lens or through an Israeli eye. And that looks very, very different than looking at it through what used to be my sort of English eye, as it were. And looking at the UK with that perspective is a very different thing, and understanding the way that our multiculturalism has developed. And, multiculturalism, I should try and say that again, shouldn't I? Multiculturalism in the UK is a very, very different animal from what it is in Israel. And Israel and Palestine in both, but Israel I think is probably is more multicultural in that sense than Palestine. But it's a very different thing than in the UK, and that's really interesting. I think you probably need a trained sociologist to articulate that really, really well. But it's something I find really fascinating.
You're postdoctoral. But
no,
I sympathise completely with what you're saying. I'm Irish, but you wouldn't know from my accent. But the thing for me, I suppose, then growing up in a country where the things that you're told about history and the role of this country in the rest of the world, doesn't ring true with what you know as, objective facts.
Interesting, yeah.
What you're saying there resonates with me quite strongly for that. I think you can only have a good perspective on yourself and your home's place in the world, having been away from it and being able to then experience it from the outside.
It's really interesting, wasn't it? I think it's an interesting place to be in, like an interesting place to have in your mind. Those kind of, you definitely have, I don't know if you find this as well, but you have like two windows on the world and you sometimes switch between them a little bit. Yeah, it's definitely a thing. There's quite some very interesting research literature on that, actually, in bilingualism. And I did quite a lot for I actually did a master's when I was in Jerusalem in partly in musicology and partly in English literature, which was far more interesting. But a lot of the research that I did I ended up using a lot of stuff on bilingualism, which was really interesting in that area. And certainly on sort of biculturalism in a lot of multiculturalism literature as well. There's a lot of work on that thing as a real thing, and I find it really interesting sort of looking at it from a cognitive point of view as well.
Amazing. Well, it feels like there's about 22-hour-long conversations that have arisen already, but well, I'll get us back on track. It'd be lovely, I think, to sit and listen to some of your playing, and this first track that you've picked out is one that shows off your links to that period of your life as well. So would you like to give a brief introduction to your first track, please?
Sure. This is a piece called Lunga Kismet. It's actually composed by a friend of mine in London, but it's very much in a Turkish style of a genre called a lunga, which is sort of very similar to a Western rondo, sort of borrowed from classical music by Turkish composers about the turn of the 19th, 20th century. And it's called Lunga Kismet, and it's with my trio, which features John Crawford on the piano and the marvellous Demi Garcia Sabat on percussion and drums.
Wonderful. Enjoy. Okay, beautiful. That was Lunga Kismet. Fantastic. So I would like to ask you a little bit about being an improvising cellist. Who obviously you draw inspiration from a huge spread of the musical world, but are there any cellists in particular as improvising musicians that you latched onto at any point that have inspired you, or have you pretty much exclusively put the cello tradition aside when you moved to improvising music?
That's also a really good question. I suppose, I guess at the beginning I didn't really think about that all that much, my own musical journey, and there weren't any other cellists, it was I did. And I've always been, especially when I started playing more straight ahead, there just weren't, now there are more, but there weren't that many. And I couldn't find that many that I resonated with either, especially sort of in jazz. Obviously, the one people like to throw at me is Oscar Pettiford, who is great, but Oscar Pettiford is a bass player. He plays pizzicato bass on the cello, which is lovely, and he's an incredible musician and he sounds fantastic on the cello, but he's not a cellist. I don't think. But anyway, no, the Lars Danielson is someone that I really liked, and another Scandinavian bass player he does some really lovely stuff on cello. And maybe in the last few years, because there's more and more people now doing really interesting stuff, that's nice now. I have my own things that I do, but there's people like Abel that you mentioned earlier. Around is Ivan Hussey does some really interesting stuff. My friend Kate Short, who is a comedian and cellist as well.
Oh, wow.
Who else is there's quite a few people around. There's Gregor Riddell, who does this lovely kind of Gnawa pizzicato thing project. So there's various people doing different things, but I think what tends to happen with cellists, maybe because we don't have, for example, the tradition of jazz playing that violinists have got, that cellists are almost forced to cut out their own little path. So people tend to sort of find their own voice. It's just really interesting, and I think there's some really interesting things going on now with people, and people finding their own things. I was just mentoring over the summer, actually. I was working with a student who was doing the Nijo outreach project, and Orphy Robinson sort of put her in my direction, and she's got some really interesting stuff going on. She's a lovely singer. She's at the Royal Welsh this year, but she's going to develop her own voice as well. You can see it coming. So I think that sort of really happens. There's a guy called Stefan Braun in Germany who's a very good straight ahead, plays more sort of straight ahead style, and there's what's the guy's name? Ernst Reisiger, I suppose, is someone that people know a lot about, and he's a great cellist and a great raconteur and a great kind of stage actor kind of presence. So he's got lots of stuff going on. And there's a guy in Italy who I really like as well. It's quite kind of Michael Brecker-ish, but on the cello. Oh, yeah. And I mean, he's an incredible cellist. So it's a guy called Jakob Sedekli.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
It's very interesting. But yeah, I think there's a lot of different people doing different things. So I guess some of them I like, some of them I think they're great, but I don't necessarily relate to it or whatever. But I love the space that people are doing it.
Yeah.
But I haven't found so many to be actually influenced by, just because there aren't that many people, particular section of interest that I have. So I guess I've nicked more off bass players and tenor sax players.
So who would you say have been your, which musicians have had the biggest impact on the jazz side of your musical world?
Probably Omar Avital, actually, the Israeli bass player that I mentioned earlier, I guess because I was in a band with him for 3 years, and his music I really, really love. There was just so many people that they're all crowding my brain at the same time, and I can't get them all out fast enough. I mean, I love it. There's several guitarists that I actually really, really love as well. Wes Montgomery I really like. Charlie Christian I'm a great fan of. And somebody whose name I can't remember, but I will shortly. I was listening to him the other day. And also, I love Wynton Kelly. Like, Wynton Kelly finishes me off every time I listen to him. Bud Powell, obviously, also completely different, but I really do love I think Wynton Kelly is probably my favourite jazz pianist.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, I don't know why, but I should try and work out why one day.
Like the clappers.
Yeah, he really does. That's it, isn't it? And it's always so bluesy and so like gutsy. And he kind of always builds his solos. He doesn't play a lot to start with. It's always really spacious and always really kind of considered. And it really takes him time to get going. But then once he does, he's kind of finishes you off. So yeah, I do love that. I love Herbie Hancock as well. There's just so many people all crowding in your brain. So yeah, loads of influences. And I suppose in Middle Eastern stuff, also Anwar Brahim is someone that I really, really love. He's a Tunisian oud player whose music I'm a massive fan of. And this guy called Sami Abu Shumez is an Egyptian violinist. I love the Egyptian style of violin playing. It's just amazing. It's so distinctive and so beautiful. So I loved him, and Ahmed Al-Hifnawi, who is a really old school Egyptian violinist, and Nino Biton, who was the guy that ran the Moroccan band that I played with in Jerusalem. He was a big influence as well, just because, again, the way he played the violin, especially as a string player. The Algerians are really interesting because they actually hold the violin on the knee, and they play it sort of like this. And when they want to cross strings, they don't move the hand, they move the violin. They do it like that. It's really weird, but it's a really distinctive sound, and I really love that. And then I suppose, like a gypsy jazz violinist, Didier Lockwood, I love his playing. Everyone always mentions Stéphane Grappelli, who obviously was a great violinist, amazing musician, and the founder of jazz in France and gypsy jazz with Django Reinhardt. But Didier Lockwood is one of my favourite violinists. And he's just got the most incredible sound, and his language is amazing. And he uses it so well. So I think he's a really big influence as well. I try and transcribe a lot of his solos. Oh, and Sonny Clark as well, pianist. I love his playing. I've been transcribing some of him over the summer. So yeah, he's another person that I really love.
And from personal indulgence, I'll ask you, sorry to repeat the sax players that you were saying earlier, because we managed to
yeah, okay. Yeah, I mean, Sonny Rollins, I suppose, is one that really sticks with me, just because I think Saxophone Colossus was the first really straight ahead jazz album that I heard a lot, and really, listened to a lot. We used to listen to it in Enkaram on the way back from in Jerusalem, on the way back from these workshops that we used to have on Tuesday evenings. And I really, really got into that album, and I loved it. And I really love with Sonny Rollins, I love his sounds, and I love the way that he builds solos, again, like so motivically, and it's so powerful. And the solo album that he's got, that's like 2 sets of solo stuff, is just ridiculous. So he's someone I really, really love. Lester Young, obviously, also. Charlie Parker, obviously, how can you not love Charlie Parker? But something doesn't sit very well on the cello. Maybe it's the wrong register. But I think also I tend to have a lower ear, so I gravitate more towards tenor players than alto. Sorry, alto players, you're all marvellous, but you're too high. Yeah, I do prefer the tenor, I think. And Chris Potter, I absolutely love them. I mean, the man is just a genius. How can you not? And Coltrane as well, obviously. But I think the few the couple of, I'm going to pick 2 that really stick in my mind. It would be Sonny Rollins and Chris Potter.
Right. Yeah. I did catch earlier you saying Hank Mobley and Joel Frahm as well, who I think.
Oh yeah, of course. If I had to pick 4, then yeah, Hank Mobley again. I've been transcribing quite a bit of him over the summer. Also, because he plays lines, he must be so forward thinking, because he plays lines that actually sit quite nicely on stringed instruments. So It's very nice of him, unlike Charlie Parker, who really doesn't. but Hank Mobley also, I love his sound, and I love it that he constructs lines so beautifully. So I've been trying to transcribe more and more of him. Joel Frahm, I really do love his playing as well. He's very sort of Chris Potter-ish, but he plays a lot with Onno Maritov's albums, so I guess I got to know his playing through those albums. But I think he's great. And Seamus Blake also is amazing.
Monster, for sure.
Yeah. And actually another pianist that I really like is this guy called, sorry, I'm just going to keep rattling him out. This guy called Adam Manis, if you come across him.
I know his name, but I can't think who I've heard him in relation to.
Well, he does these things that are open studio podcasts, which are with is it Peter Martin that he does them with, but they're very sort of short, bite-sized little podcasts, and they're really handy and really useful. And he's very cool. I really like him in the podcasts, but I checked him out, and I really like his trio. He's great.
Yeah.
Very interesting.
All
So yeah.
I was going to say was Joel Fromm's like Chris Potter, but with more TV theme quotes. He throws in so many little sci-fi movie and
Yeah,
TV theme quotes, and it absolutely cracks me up. I don't know how they come to him in the moment when you're in the middle of all of that. How that's the thing that pops into your head. I don't know. He obviously
yeah,
has spent a lot of time watching TV at some point in his life.
yeah. Maybe he's one of those people that practices with the TV on.
Maybe, yeah, that could well be it.
My brother practices with a test match on, but I don't think that's quite as fertile a ground for theme tunes.
Well, the funniest thing I ever did while practicing was in my first term of my undergrad as an embouchure building exercise. We had to play with the mouthpiece fully pushed on, but still play in tune. So you're having a really dropped embouchure in order to bring the pitch down, and it strains these muscles loads. So it's like hitting the gym, but for.
I'm taking it that's not on the piano.
No, on a saxophone. Yeah, this is for writing. I'm dreadful at anything technical on it, but so myself and my housemates used to play video games with the sax wedged between our legs, just playing open C sharps with the tuner sitting on top of the TV, and we're like, oh, we'd just sit for hours building up chots. It was great.
Yeah. I used to when I was doing like Sevchik stuff, like it was a really boring bowing exercise. I used to put a snooker on when I was doing those.
Excellent. Yeah. So, but back from all of that, then I'd like to delve into some of your projects. So, first of all, I suppose let's delve in with the trio. So you've got the album out, Long Story Short.
Yeah.
And that's the trio, but with some guest artists as well. Nikki Isles plays accordion.
Yes, she does. Orphy Robinson played vibraphone on a couple of tracks.
Amazing, yeah.
And Nicholas Meyer played guitar on a few tracks as well. And obviously that's with John Crawford, who is just a fantastic pianist to work with, and Demi Garcia Sabat. So that was the kind of core trio that I worked with. I've worked with for a few years now. But yeah, the idea on that was really just to sort of bring together all my different influences and put them in one place.
Right. Yeah.
With the trio was a nice format to do it in. I really like playing in the trio format. Even though I'm writing a sextet at the moment for the London Jazz Festival, which will be the trio plus tenor sax, trumpet, and bass.
Great.
But yeah, it's nice to have both, and I really do enjoy working with the trio.
Have you got musicians lined up for the trumpet, tenor, and bass?
Yep.
Can they be revealed yet, or are they?
They can, because one of them is someone I work with I've got another CD out with my very, very good friend and colleague James Arbon, who is a ridiculous tenor sax player, flute player, and bass clarinet player who's far too modest. So if he's listening to this, he should definitely know this. But I met James.
Is he in with you? Is that?
No, that was Joe Brown, who is also a tremendously monstrous tenor sax player. He's great as well.
I remember seeing, I know you have a sax player in that group as well. I couldn't. Sorry.
Yeah. Melange was a different project which will return at some point. But James, I met playing with Mulata Statke, the Ethiopian vibraphone player. That James is the MD for his band, and so I met him with that. And actually, we started talking about doing a duo project together, which I'll maybe talk about in a bit, because we just got an album out with that. Awesome. So yeah, James is taking tenor, flute, and bass clarinet, so that gives me some options to play with different instruments, which is nice. It's quite a new project, so it's going to take a little while to develop, but I wanted to have those different sonorities. And then Tim Quick on the trumpet. Very, very lovely trumpet player that I met. This is a result of another drunk conversation on a beach in St Ives last September. Right. And we got talking about, we were doing a gig at St Ives Jazz Club, and we got talking about Omar Avital and sort of Middle Eastern jazz, and he was super into it. So I thought, and his playing really suited the sound that I want. So he'll be on trumpet, and Liran Donin on bass, who is just an amazing bass player. And again, someone I met playing with Mulata Statke.
Fantastic. Well, that sounds like an amazing project. So, yeah.
Hopefully, I've got to go and write it.
So, is that the end of this year then that's happening?
Yeah, we've got a gig at London Jazz Festival on the 22nd of November, and I've written most of the stuff. Actually, I've got a couple of pieces left to finish, but most of it is done. Yeah.
Yeah.
And James and I just released an album of completely freely improvised duos called Entanglement.
So I saw it.
Um,
Yeah, great.
yeah.
And
That was a result of a wine-fused conversation in a green room.
and so, did you use anything as starting points for those improvisations, or was it purely get in a room and make an album, see what happens?
Moles.
Bowls,
Moles.
moles.
Yeah. Well, basically, we were chatting in the green room one time on a gig, and James was saying, he'd really like to do some different types of playing, and I just saying, why don't we get together and do some free stuff? So I went round to his house one day, and we just sort of started playing, and he hadn't done any before, so it was sort of interesting. And we played one, and he said, it sounds like the snaffling of moles, doesn't it? And this became a bit of a running joke now, so everything we do has some kind of mole theme wound in there somewhere. But musically, no, we didn't. I mean, we kind of had some shared concepts of what we thought free improvisation could be. And that was basically it, really. And then we just sort of played and talked about it a bit more, and let it happen. And I like that, because we like going in and out of tonal areas, for example, so it doesn't have to be non-tonal, but we bring in effects, as in effects with the instrument, not pedals. We may well bring those in later as well. We just didn't have any of those that day. But yeah, I think we both liked the idea that it could be tonal, it could be groove based, it could go out completely elsewhere as well. So there's a lot of different things in it, and that was, I think, is when you're doing free improvisation, for me, one of the most important things is having that sort of shared concept even if it's in the back of your mind and you don't really bring it out consciously, but it's there, and it really helps you to trust the person you're playing with, which for me, when you're doing free improv, is absolutely paramount.
Yeah, I had a very strange experience one time doing a free improvised project with, it was a group that was a mix of sort of contemporary classical improvising musicians and improvising jazz musicians and just free improvising musicians who don't particularly adhere to any other genres or anything like that. And we were playing, and it's that strange thing, everyone's trying to find the musical common ground, and I was trying to get some kind of, as I felt it, some kind of dialogue with people, and and at the end of it, one member of the group who's a fairly respected musician, so I won't drop any names because of my views, but said something along the lines of like, this is dreadful. There's people are trying to develop ideas and imitate things, and it's ruining everything basically. And I went, and for me it was like, I don't understand what the music is if some of those things aren't in place. But I was intrigued by the statement of we had to deciding what the common ground is before you begin.
I mean, sometimes it can be interesting sort of working that out as you go along, and obviously discussing the concept of free in jazz and improvisation is a rabbit hole that no one has got enough lives to get to the end of. So, I mean, I guess for me, free does mean that you can go in and out of tonal. If you can't, then that's not free anymore. That's got stuff, or a rabbit hole opened. But I like that concept where you can develop ideas, and the idea of a dialogue with somebody as well. Then I'm very much in for that idea.
Yeah, and I went after. I sort of questioned everything about life after that rehearsal, and then I called a friend of mine who's a great jazz drummer, but also very involved in the free improvised world in across Europe and all of that. Amazing musician. And I said, look, I don't know where I start and end anymore. What can you help me? And he said, oh yeah, I wouldn't worry about it. Basically, he's a non-idiomatic free player, and therefore, drawing on any sense of genre or style is not acceptable in his outlook of what improvised music is. And I felt that as you said,
Yeah.
I feel that that's putting a real straitjacket on it, you know.
For me, that is it's a very kind of rejective notion of free,
Hmm.
and I don't get that. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
I don't know if that makes
absolutely.
sense, but I that's the problem I have with it, is that it's, if you're rejecting things, then there is something there you're rejecting,
Yeah.
and that's not quite free.
Hmm.
um like, I prefer to accept it and then accept all of it and then choose what to use, or
Yeah.
sometimes not choose what to use, like it decides just to pop out is another way that things happen. But
Yeah.
that, for me, that just sits better as a concept of free improvisation. And that, that's taken me a little bit of going in and out of that world, and a little bit of experimenting and fiddling about with, and doing gigs that I haven't really enjoyed, and not been able to quite work out why, or just haven't
Yeah.
connected with. um but I know that's what works for me, and that's the sort of area line that I go in with my free stuff, and I like that. It suits it, that's where I can express what I feel I have to put in that area of activity. um,
Absolutely.
and I
Look,
wouldn't want to say that it's right or wrong, and
yeah, it's music. It's whatever we want it to be.
yeah,
Um,
that's my sort of authenticity,
yeah.
to use the buzzword.
Excellent.
But it is, and it's a
Yeah.
considered one as well, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And it does feel like the perfect time to play the second track that you've picked out for us, as this is an improvisation that you did. Would you like to talk us through
Yeah.
a bit about this, please?
Yeah, that does fit nicely, actually. Yeah, this is a little bit of a lockdown project, in that it's built on a series of photographs that I took from my window ledge just over there, where I like to sit and watch the sun go down. I'm very lucky. I live in North London, in Wood Green, and I'm in an attic, as you might be able to see from the shape of the roof. And just on my window over there, if I climb on my bed and hang out the window, I can see the sun going down. And I do like to do that as often as possible. And I took so many photos. I've got like thousands of photos of sunsets. Um, so I decided to make a little video of them and work out how GarageBand works at the same time. So this is
and
basically it.
and the music, were you reflecting on the sunsets with when you were actually recording the music, or did they just happen to be a good pairing with what you had recorded?
No, I put the photo sequence together first,
Mm.
and then I started just kind of, because I was also working out how the hell GarageBand works at the first time, because we all had to learn how to become home recording engineers in
Yeah.
this time, and I'm rubbish at that. So I thought, and all I had was GarageBand on my iPad, so I thought, well, I might as well have a poke around with it. And I've never been able to work it out before. I've always just opened it and gone and closed it again. But I thought, I'm going to work this out. So I just started kind of recording bits and faffing around with it and building it up and poking about and seeing what happened. But the photo sequence came first, and then I put it's all improvised. It's all
Yeah.
just overdubbed improvisations, but it's all got put together like that.
Beautiful. Well, sit back and enjoy. Gorgeous. Thanks so much for the improvisation sunsets video. Thank you for putting the time together. So I would like to ask you a little bit about some of the other projects you're involved in. So I don't know how much of a lead role you take in these things, but first of all, Melange is obviously seems like a great outlet for a lot of your, like you say, not the best term, but world music, sort of
Yeah.
interests.
Well,
Could you
yeah.
tell us a little bit about the band, a bit about the project? You've got a couple of albums out with that, so people can check those out in the links below at the end.
Sure. Yeah, Melange was basically the first band that I put together when I came back from Jerusalem, because I came back, I'd been in there for so long and I lost contact with pretty much everybody here and everything, so I really had to start again from scratch. And I really wanted to carry on playing the stuff that I'd played in Jerusalem and a lot of that world, and I couldn't quite find it. Took me a little while to find the area to do that, because a lot of that music actually isn't played here at all. It's a very different area, especially the Moroccan stuff, but gradually I met the right musicians for it. A guy called Peter Michaels, who's a wonderful guitarist and studio producer. So we started out as a duo and then gradually collected people as we went along, and it became a kind of 8-piece band in the end, and we recorded a couple of albums with that. But a lot of that was based on mostly based on arrangements of traditional material, which we developed through I used to run a jam session at the Ritzy Picture House in Brixton. It's this little cinema where they had live music upstairs, and we had a jam session running there for about 5 or 6 years, and a lot of the arrangements kind of evolved very organically in those sessions. So yeah, that band grew, it developed very organically over about 5 or 6 years, and then I realised I wanted to take a break and sort of move on and do some other things, but I will certainly come back to it at some point.
Fantastic. Yeah. Well,
yeah, we released Random Roads and Via Maris for the 2 albums we released.
Yeah. I had a delve into Via Maris earlier on today and had listened through it. It's great. So I'm glad it's not dead.
It's definitely not dead. No, it's just having a little rest.
Okay, excellent. And then the other group is the Balkan Cafe Band, which is your gypsy jazz.
Well, actually, it's called the Balagan Cafe Band. It's slightly different word.
I'm trying to read my own scribbles here.
That's okay. Don't worry. It's an easy mistake to make. It's a lovely project that I have with my friend Christian Miller, who's a great jazz guitarist, and Richard Jones, who is a wonderful violinist. And it's another one of those marvelous accidents that happens in life. I thought that Richard and I were trying to do a gypsy jazz sort of string trio, and we couldn't quite find the right people for it. And I just thought, actually, Richard and Christian should meet each other. So we met, and then Christian kind of went, I like this. This is going to be my new project. So we and then he said, what should we call it? And we were playing kind of a range of different stuff. The core of it is gypsy jazz, but we've got some world music stuff in there as well, and we've all put compositions in and things. So it's very much a collaborative project. Right. And we all really like, we're all quite open in the way we treat stuff and things. So I just said, why don't we call it the Balagan Cafe Band? Because Balagan is a Hebrew word that basically means a big mess. And it can be used to describe anything from like your bedroom to the Middle East. Is it Balagan? So we called it that, and we've done quite a lot of gigs with it, and it's a lovely band, and I love working with Richard and Christian. They're great. It's a lot of fun.
Is that still, obviously, saying anything is active at the moment seems like a bit of a ridiculous statement.
Yeah.
Is that still an active and gigging unit?
Very much so, yeah. Yeah, I mean, we're all obviously gigging when gigs happen with other projects as well. But yeah, definitely, it's very much an ongoing project, that one.
Wonderful stuff. And so what does the future hold for you at the moment? Obviously, you've got the London Jazz Festival commission, which is very exciting. Are you going to be recording that then at some point as well?
Yeah, I would like to do with the new projects. Obviously, it's a new band, so it's going to need a little bit of time to settle. But the plan is to possibly do a live album at some point in the spring. And I've started sort of sketching some stuff out for a studio album, which will be very, very different, probably late next year, I think, is the plan with that. I would like to get in the studio and do another trio one at some point as well. in the next year or so. So I've got some, but I kind of have to write that, so that my there was just an idea that popped into my head a couple of weeks ago, but that will happen at some point as well.
Right.
I've actually got a quintet as well. The duo that I have with James extends to a completely freely improvised quintet with Alex Hawkins on piano, Liran Dolan on bass, and John Scott on the drums. And we will get in a studio as soon as humanly possible and record that. And I've actually recorded a duo album with Robert Mitchell, the pianist, an incredible pianist. And he wrote this wonderful poem because his mother was a Windrush nurse, and Robert wrote this incredible poem called A Son of Windrush Reflects, which we did at Pizza Express for Giorgio Mancio's Hang a couple of years ago now, maybe last November. I think it was last November. But it's just a totally straight down the line poem reflecting on the position that the Windrush generation have been put on in this, in the UK, and on the health service and the work that nurses and carers do. And it is so powerful, and it's a real honour to have recorded it. The fact that it's a duo album is the centre of it. And so the whole thing is built around that, and that will be coming out sometime next year.
Okay,
with Robert.
Fantastic. Well, yeah, please let us know when that's all happening so we can
for sure
spread the word near and far. So
yeah,
brilliant. So it sounds like it's going to be an incredibly busy next sort of 18 months to 2 years of recording and releases and more recording.
Trying to write a PhD. Somewhere.
In principle, writing some PhD.
Yeah, it'll get done somehow.
Yeah. Well, look, it's been such a pleasure, Shirley, and hopefully we can have you up in Manchester, at some point soonish if things allow. We'll love to have you back. Well,
Inshallah.
I say back.
Yeah, there's a beautiful Arabic word for this, was inshallah, which means God willing. Which I think even if you don't believe in God, it's a nice word. So, thank you so much for having me as well, and thanks for doing the podcast. It's so good to have something at least going on in this time, and I've been watching some of them. It's a nice chance to kind of get to know people as well. So thanks so much for doing it.
Oh, a massive pleasure, and thanks so much for your time and for your great stories and insight into what's been a very exciting life, I think, so far. Long may it continue. So lovely.
You could do with it being a bit less exciting, but that seems to have been taken care of. Thanks so much, Karen. Take care.
All the best.
Bye.
Hello again. Thanks so much for taking the time to tune in today, and huge thanks, of course, to Shirley. It was an absolute pleasure chatting to her. Please head over to her Bandcamp to check out Long Story Short. Please head over to her website to check out all of her other musical projects, and of course head over to patreon.com/NQJazz to check out everything that we've been doing over the last while and to help support our artists. Take care, and we hope to see you again next time. Bye bye.